Welcome to Now Daily. I'm Robert Crawford. Here's what's happening now. Judge Antonin Scalia has passed away in Texas under some very unusual circumstances, actually very natural circumstances according to the media, although the Washington Times and the Washington Post have reported that he was found with a pillow over his head. Maybe he was just sleeping that way. Maybe there was foul play. What we do know is this will have a major impact on the most important court in the land. So Judge Scalia was one of 9 members of the Supreme Court. He was one of the oldest members in the Supreme Court. He was originally appointed by Reagan, and he passed away in Shafter, Texas yesterday. Now, he was a very conservative member of the Supreme Court, a big believer in the Second Amendment. I believe he voted against the gay marriage ruling, which came out earlier in 2015. So this is going to have a big impact on anyone's political views as we continue forward. The bigger impact, I feel, with this is not the petty differences between the conservatives and the liberals. We've talked about how the establishment's really both working in accordance, and they're working together to form what people would call the New World Order, the One World Government. This is a very real thing. They have both signed on board to Agenda 21, which has now become Agenda 2030 with the United Nations. They continue to cipher power away from the American government and giving it to the United Nations and even now corporations with things like the TPP, which is being done in secret, which they're trying to pass, which will give power to the corporations to sue the federal, state, and local governments if they were to infringe on their profits in any way. Basically gives them power over the state. So we constantly see this, that they're pulling power away from the people, even away from the government, and giving it to the major corporations and the banksters. The IMF and the World Bank, who control the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is the key to all these issues. Now, the Supreme Court ruled that money was basically speech, giving the corporations power to donate to these super PACs and run advertising for candidates in the election. We see their favorited candidates like Hillary Clinton, Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio. I would even say Ted Cruz would be in that bunch. And then you see the outside politicians, such as Bernie Sanders on the left, and I guess you could say Trump on the right. Even though really they're both totalitarians, they're both authoritarians, they both want big government. They both want to be able to be in a position of power in order to tell you what to do. Bernie Sanders seems a little less offensive as a person in his speeches, and his speeches are touching about the major issues. They're touching about the control that the government has in our lives. They're touching about the major banks ripping off everyone. They're talking, but he's not talking really about ending the Federal Reserve, although he did vote to audit the bill recently, although he did almost single-handedly kill it in the Senate in 2009. So very contradictory. What we do know for sure is there's been a number of rulings by the Supreme Court in favor of corporatism and not to the people. So what's going to happen now is Obama will likely appoint a new judge. We're not exactly sure who his predecessors is going to be. We do have some guesses on that, but what we do know is it'll probably be someone with a liberal point of view, someone with Obama's similar point of view. And that point of view is that the state should be in control. We see them constantly pushing that the state is almost like a godlike entity. We're even seeing them come with an assault on parents, saying that the state should be almost in charge of your kids. I've seen articles recently saying that they are considering having a state-appointed or a federal government-appointed official in charge of each family. Basically, you would have a government representative in charge of looking over how you raise your kids. We see this push continuing in the education system, where they are indoctrinating kids into this totalitarian big government mindset, when the problem is small government. And although we've lost major control over the legislature, we've definitely lost control over the executive branch. Although any Democrat or even some, independents and Republicans will say, no, everything's fine. Nothing is fine. We're going through an economic collapse right now. We have a fiat currency, which means that they can pretty much do anything to destroy your purchasing power. There's only a few ways to hedge against it. I like real estate investing. That's why I do that for my living. You can go to wearerealty.com to learn more about that, or even realbusinesstalk.com to learn more about that. But the Supreme Court was kind of our last line of defense, where if the legislature passes an unconstitutional law like they have, for example, 1913 Federal Reserve Act, blatantly unconstitutional. Section 1, Article 10 of the Constitution clearly states, quote, only gold and silver coin shall be used as the tender to pay debts. That's blatantly unconstitutional that we're now off the gold standard with the dollar. We're seeing a huge intake in China purchasing gold. China is now purchasing more gold per year than is actually mined and produced. They're taking the entire production plus some every year. Why? Because they're going to plan on backing 3% of their currency to gold, which will then make it a gold-backed reserve currency, which will then make people flood from the dollar and go to the yuan. So there's a lot of things in play. The Supreme Court was the individual's last line of defense. If you thought that a law that was passed with the legislature and then signed into law by the president was unconstitutional, you can then argue it up the appellate courts up to the Supreme Court, and they can make a ruling on it. We saw this ruling come in, I believe it was 2014, with the ruling on the American Affordable Health Care Bill, basically the Obamacare bill. The Supreme Court ruled that it was constitutional because it was a tax and that they were allowed to do it. So you can see that just one judge either way, because most of these rulings are usually split decision, 5-4. Some rulings are unanimous, and those are rulings that we'll probably all agree on. But there's a lot of these controversial rulings that are really just one person away. And now that Scalia is gone, he had a conservative point of view. Whether you agree with that or not, what's definitely going to happen is it's likely that Obama will put someone in, the Senate will then have to confirm them, and then they'll get appointed to the bench. They'll serve a lifelong sentence. That's what a Supreme Court judge has, a lifelong sentence. You can stay on there as long as you want. You can retire, or you can pass away like Judge Scalia just did. And it will have a huge effect on a lot of these bills, because most of these bills are unconstitutional. Many of them are passed through very shady means, meaning there was a bill passed just the other week that was done, on the night of a giant snowstorm in Washington. They try to sneak these bills in, they get them passed. The majority really doesn't have a say. We're seeing these election grabs right now. Hillary Clinton won 6 coin tosses in a row in New Hampshire, and she still walks away with more. 6 coin tosses in a row in Iowa, and in New Hampshire, even though she lost by votes, I think it was like 60% for Bernie Sanders, 40% for Hillary. She lost by votes. She still wins by delegates. She comes away with 15 delegates. Bernie Sanders gets 13 for that state. So we can see that by manipulating the system, they can pretty much get the way that they want. So a lot of questions are now coming up. Was this really a natural death? We know that the CIA does have the ability, other people have the ability, individuals as well, to assassinate individuals and leave almost no traces of foul play. So that's definitely a possibility. What's going to be interesting is what bills are going to come through this year, and then who's going to be appointed on this court. So we're going to keep on top of this. We'll let you know how this affects you and how this affects our lives in America. And if you know anything else, just comment below. Subscribe to Now Daily, and I'm Robert Crawford. We're signing off.